I just finished auditing a client's test environment. It was well governed, it was secure, but it was rarely used. Why? They didn't know how to easily keep it in lockstep with their production environment. And that's not as difficult as you're thinking right now. Stick around, and I'm going to show you how to easily keep your environments consistent in Databricks. As data engineers, we trade in trust. If you break the pipeline because you tested on a tiny sample data set with different permissions than production, you lose that trust. So let's lock in trust and consistency with how to do CI/CD in Databricks. The Databricks environment that I tested had Lakeflow Connect pipelines, jobs, and declarative pipelines, all in production that didn't exist in their lower environments. That company brought in another consulting company to create their silver layer tables. 3 months in, there were still 0 tables in production. They were using production tables to analyze and test, to create notebooks, to move the data into silver development tables, but the orchestration couldn't be created or tested. I audited the environment, found that there were multiple inconsistencies between their dev, test, and production environments. I tackled the elephant in the room first so that the company that they hired could stop burning money with nothing to show and unblock their teams. The Lakeflow Connect pipelines needed to be created in both the development and the test environments. Without this method that I'm getting ready to show you, the process is difficult, it's manual, you actually have to recreate the objects in those other environments. This leaves room for human error, inconsistencies, and just fat finger issues, right? Asset bundles are your container for your data projects. In a asset bundle, you can put your code, your job definitions, including your Lakeflow Connect and declarative pipelines, your permissions, your cluster configurations, all that. You can even create variables so that you could easily put things into your production, test, and dev environments easily. That way, you define the pipelines once and then tell Databricks where to deploy it all. And the asset bundles handle the differences, like swapping out schema names automatically. So let's take a look at a simple demo using Lakeflow Connect as the artifact that needs to be deployed across all 3 environments. You need to have your Databricks environment tied to your Git repository. If you don't know how to do this and you want me to do a whole video on it, let me know down in the comments. If there's enough interest, I'll take the time to do it. Otherwise, let's jump into some dabs. Now, whatever repo you have tied to this, navigate to that folder. For me, it's Scalable Data Engineering. We're going to right click on that folder. We're going to create an asset bundle. Very easy to start. We're going to start with an empty project. We're going to name our asset bundle. What are we going to name it? Today, we're just going to name it Dabs Test. Again, Dabs is Databricks Asset Bundles. We're going to hit create. I'm going to leave it at empty object. I like to leave it at that. This way you start from scratch. To add an existing Lakeflow Connect pipeline, we're going to click on Add, and then we're going to go to New Job Definition. I know this is counterintuitive, but stick with me here. We're going to name the job the same as your Lakeflow Connect pipeline, SFDC. Now, we're not going to hit Add and Deploy because we need to actually populate this file. We're going to say only add, deploy later. It's going to add a skeleton of a YAML file here. And here's where the magic starts to happen. We're going to flip over to SFDC. These 3 dots up here, you could click and go to View Settings YAML. Here, we're going to just copy this YAML. We're going to flip back over here. We're going to delete what was there existing, and we're going to paste this in here. We've copied our and we've pasted it into our YAML file in our dab. Similarly, if you have other jobs and other pipelines you need to add, you could do that by adding new job and copy and pasting the YAML from that object into your YAML file in your dab. If you have a notebook that's tied to a job, you still need to commit and submit PRs and merge those specific objects through your environments. Now, here we are going to edit this pre-built file. And this pre-built file that I'm talking about is this Databricks YAML. So there's a few things going on here. We have our bundle name, or dapps test. We have our include statement. So these are the assets that it's actually going to include when you deploy your bundle. We have your targets, our dev, and our production. And here we want a third environment. Some places you only have two environments. If you only have dev and production, you don't need to do anything here. But a lot of places have a third environment, and you have a test in between there. So we're going to copy this prod section, and here in a second I'm going to explain why we're using prod, not test. And we are going to clean this up a little bit. We're going to change this prod to test. We're actually going to leave the mode as production. I'll explain that here in a second. Our host, for me, our host is going to be the same today, but know that in a real world situation, you're going to change these hosts to whatever your other environment is. For example, I actually do have a second free edition environment that I have set up. You'll actually see in the top in your browser here, you'll actually notice that there's a different account here, right? There's a different URL for this environment. So I'm going to copy this. We're going to flip back over to our Databricks YAML, and we'll use that as our production environment. So you really just paste that other environment URL for your host into the appropriate section in your dapps. Now, we've changed our test. We're leaving it at production. Let me explain why real quick. If you create your test and leave it at development, it does this. And I left this in here as an example. It puts these square brackets and says dev and the user as a prefix to the name of the object. That causes issues when you have objects. For instance, if you have a LFC pipeline that is tied to a on-premise SQL server, in addition to the actual pipeline, you will have a gateway pipeline that's making that connection, right? And it's running and has that connection to that on-premise SQL server. So you need that gateway to deploy before your actual LFC pipeline, and you need it to be named the same way that you're going to want it to be named in your production environment, so that you go from test to production and it works. That's why we're using production as the mode here. Again, root path is going to stay the same. So another comment about the include section, keep in mind, the include section, it's going to deploy in the order in which your include resources are put in here. So if you have a specific order, like that gateway example I mentioned, be sure that you're putting that gateway in a specific folder. What I like to do is under the resource folder, I like to create a couple of other folders. One for, we'll call it step 1 for today, but usually I call it gateways for my gateways, and I'll call it jobs for my jobs and pipelines for my pipelines, so that you often have your gateway that needs to be run first, your pipelines that need to be run second, like your LFC or your DLT/declarative pipelines. And then as a third step, you'll want to deploy your jobs, right? Because the jobs are often running your pipelines, which are dependent upon your gateways. So we'll just call it step 1 today. We really only have one thing, and we could move this up into step 1. And then what we would do here is we would say step 1 / YAML. And we actually don't need that second one, but this way you logically step through your include pieces. All right, our next step is to actually add our variables. The one that we're going to add today is our environment variable. You can also add other variables here. So you'll see that when we start to type in var, that it suggests variables. We'll hit tab. We're going to do a colon, and then we're going to hit enter, and you'll see that automatically indent. We're going to say environment. Make sure that you spell environment correctly, because you'll use it repetitively. Now, you're not actually going to put anything here. This is just to instantiate that variable. If you have other variables, put them here to instantiate them. We're going to copy this, and we're going to put it under our dev, test, and production. We're going to do that because in each of those, we want to declare that environment variable as something different. Obviously in dev, we're going to call it dev. In test, we'll probably call it test. And in production, you'll probably call it production. But if you have other production specific variables that you need to add, then you could add those here. Again, we're going to say dev, no need for any apostrophes or quotes. We're going to say test, and we're going to say prod. And those are our variables. Now, once you have, after you've declared your variables, this next step is super important. If you get this part wrong, then you're going to wonder where all your data is flowing to, right? Like I mentioned before, all that right now is going into our dev catalogs and schemas. So we want to change that so it dynamically changes depending on where we're deploying these pipelines. So we're going to go back into our YAML file where we have that definition. And now it's under step 1 and our SFDC job. So here you see that we have underscore dev in a lot of places, both for our browns and our Salesforce. I'm actually just going to do Control C to copy that underscore dev. I'm going to do Control F to open up my find window. I'm going to paste my underscore dev, and then I'm going to do underscore $, squiggly bracket, var dot environment, end your bracket, and we're going to replace all. And it's going to go through there, and you'll see that it goes through and replaces everything down through there. We're just going to do a real fast scan to check and make sure that it did indeed do that. And it did. Now, you see at first that that main was grayed out, right? I couldn't do a commit. Give that a second. When you do this find and replace, it takes a second or two for Databricks to catch up. Depending on how big the file is, I've had some of these where we're importing hundreds of objects. It may take 30 seconds or a minute before you can commit. So give it a minute. It will switch back to allow you to commit. Now, committing is important here. Once you make changes, once you've done all the things for your dabs that you need to do, you want to commit because your dabs is going to run whatever is last committed. So we're going to say created dabs for a demo, and we're going to commit and push. You don't necessarily have to merge it. In our case, we're using the main branch anyways, because this is my repo for my development, and we're going to close that. Now we're going to go back to our rocket. Again, the rocket is where our home is going to be for a lot of these things. So you see that our target currently is dev. We have a test and the production is disabled. Again, because that production one is going to a different URL. So generally, you're going to have a different URL for each of your environments in a lot of cases. Once you're at your rocket, you're going to select the environment that you want to deploy into. You'll notice that my production is disabled, and that's because it goes to a different URL. In a lot of environments, you will have your other environments will show as disabled depending on where you're at, and only the environment that you can deploy in will be able to be deployed in. That helps you in a couple different ways. It keeps you from deploying in the wrong environment, and it makes sure that the right resources are going to the right place. We're going to switch this over to our test environment. You'll see that it loads our bundle resources. You see our SFDC pipeline appears here. When you hover over that one, it is grayed out, and you see a cloud with a line through it to show you that the resource is not deployed yet in the environment you selected. You still have this add button. You'll notice that there's an add existing resources. This actually just goes to documentation. So if you need to see the documentation, there it is. But right now we're going to hit deploy. It's going to take a second. It's going to read. It's going to identify the pipelines that you want to deploy. And then you're going to hit deploy. And it's going to take a second, but it's going to go through and actually deploy the objects that you selected. So here's the thing. If you try to deploy it, you already have an object in there, name that, and the dabs is not already connected to that object, then it's not going to deploy. Now, if you have a dabs that's already tied to that object, then it's going to understand that object's already there. So from our SFDC job, we are going to rename this SFDC_demo so that it's named something different than my existing pipeline, so I don't have errors here. We're going to click on the rocket. We're going to change our target to test. We're going to wait for that bundle resource to appear, which is our SFDC demo. You see that it has created that here. When we hover over that, we see that the resource is not deployed yet, and we see that via this cloud with a line through it. When it is deployed, this turns into a blue link, which we'll see once this deploys successfully. So when we see all that, we can hit deploy. It's going to take a second. It's going to show you again which objects are going to deploy to test. We're going to hit deploy. It's going to go through and do its checks, make sure that the resources aren't existing, make sure that the resources that it's dependent on are existing, and we see that it finished deploying on test target successfully. And we see that the link is now blue. So when we click on that, it will actually open up the object that it created. If you aren't already thinking of ways that you could use this, like bulk adding selected tables to your LFC pipeline, then you are still thinking like a junior, not like a staff engineer. It's time to stop treating your test environment like a playground. Manual deployments are a silent failure waiting to happen. If you want to be taken seriously, automate that infrastructure. If your jobs are deploying correctly, but still failing at 3 a.m., then you don't have a deployment problem, you have a resiliency problem. And I show you how to fix that in this video right now.